Hello everyone, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. Today's book for interpretation is Raus aus Schema F, Out of Pattern F, with the subtitle, Understanding the Inner Child, Changing Behavior Patterns, and Exploring New Paths. In our daily lives or online, we often encounter these kinds of sentiments, sometimes resonating deeply. For instance, despite being 30 years old, one might still feel immature, like a child psychologically. Or perhaps, being overly inclined to please others, finding it difficult to refuse requests and feeling guilty at the thought of saying no. And there's the scenario where life seems trapped in a loop, struggling in every job and eventually forced to resign. Why do we feel like children sometimes? Why does saying no evoke feelings of guilt? What perpetuates repeating the same mistakes, and how can we break this cycle? These are the questions this book seeks to address. The author of this book, Gitta Jacob, is a German psychologist with 20 years of experience in psychotherapy, particularly dedicated to schema therapy. Works related to schema therapy have been translated into more than 10 languages. This book aims to unravel the classic work of schema therapy. Think of schemas as a kind of structure. Schema therapy, first proposed by American psychologist Jeffrey Young in 1993, builds upon cognitive behavioral therapy while integrating various psychological approaches like psychodynamics and Gestalt, forming a novel psychological treatment. It has gained acceptance among many psychologists. The book contends that our thoughts and reactions toward things are governed by different psychological patterns, akin to fixed life scripts. Following different scripts leads to encountering diverse emotions and situations. Some experiences occur 0 times due to different scripts, while others happen 10,000 times. The author dissects people's psychological patterns into 4 parts: the inner child, the inner critic, the adult self, and coping mechanisms. The inner child represents the immature part of ourselves resembling our childhood selves. The inner critic judges our actions and thoughts internally, acting as an inner judge. Meanwhile, the adult self embodies the mature and composed aspects of ourselves. These components, akin to commanders of our thoughts, influence our behaviors. The author compares these behaviors to clothes: some fit comfortably while others feel awkward or unsuitable. Under the dominance of the adult self, our behaviors are natural and appropriate, akin to wearing tailor-made clothes. Conversely, under the dominance of the inner child or the inner critic, we tend to adopt inappropriate coping mechanisms, akin to wearing clothes either too large or too small. To alter our behavior, understanding how these psychological patterns operate is crucial. Changing these patterns leads to a transformation in life scripts. It allows us to minimize negative experiences and multiply positive ones. Therefore, this interpretation will follow the logic of exploring this book through its 4 components of psychological patterns. 1. How to identify the inner child. 2. How to identify the inner critic. 3. What are common inappropriate coping mechanisms. 4. How can one cultivate a stable, adult self? Let's tackle the first question: how to identify the inner child. Before answering, understanding how the inner child forms is crucial. The author highlights that children, while growing into adults, have basic needs such as love, respect, independence in activities and play, freedom to express their needs, and establishing boundaries with others. When these needs are fulfilled, a happy inner child is nurtured within. Conversely, unmet basic needs lead to detrimental thought and behavior patterns, often manifested as the wounded inner child and the spoiled inner child. The wounded inner child emerges when a child lacks love and security during their upbringing, like losing caregivers or lacking parental care. Threats to our sense of security and love awaken this wounded aspect, making us feel abandoned, rejected, or mistrusted, as if we're living alone in the world. What about the spoiled inner child? This aspect often arises from a childhood lacking boundaries. It could be parents micromanaging everything, resulting in a lack of autonomy, or never setting boundaries, hindering the learning of handling setbacks. When faced with setbacks or threats to autonomy, the spoiled inner child awakens. Under its influence, we might feel angry, impulsive, aggressive, disregarding rules of the real world. It's noteworthy that the wounded inner child and the spoiled inner child often coexist, influencing our emotions and behaviors simultaneously. Consider Sarah, who, due to a childhood lacking love and security, feels hurt and upset whenever her sense of love and security is threatened. When her friend Monica didn't invite her to a gathering, Sarah felt abandoned, expressing anger towards Monica for not caring about her presence. Then there's Liam, raised in a difficult family environment, lacking parental care due to alcohol and drug addiction. He tends to assume he's unloved and will be abandoned when interacting with people. Once, upon hearing his cousin talking to Liam's mom on the phone, Liam felt enraged and ended up sweeping the tableware onto the floor. Both Sarah and Liam, in their experiences, first awakened their wounded inner child, feeling wronged and abandoned by those they trusted. Subsequently, the spoiled inner child took charge, compelling them to express their needs through anger. Following the discussion of the wounded inner child and the spoiled inner child, it's essential to highlight the happy inner child. The presence of a happy inner child exists within everyone, albeit varying in strength. The more love and encouragement one receives during childhood, the stronger this happy aspect becomes. Its primary functions involve resisting real-world stress, preserving our mental health by indulging in activities like games or leisure after a taxing week of work, and, importantly, suppressing detrimental personality traits. The author suggests that a robust, happy inner child minimizes the influence of the wounded or spoiled aspects. However, it's unrealistic for adults to perpetually remain in a childlike state. Even with a happy inner child, we ultimately must engage with the world using our adult selves. After discussing the inner child, let's move on to explore the second crucial component of people's psychological patterns, the inner critic. Before understanding how to identify the inner critic, let's first grasp how it forms. If the inner child's genesis originates from unmet basic needs, the inner critic stems from negative information encountered during childhood and adolescence. For instance, being criticized as lazy, incompetent, lacking feminine traits, being too fragile or selfish, etc. These external negative inputs transform into our inner critic. Let's understand this through an example. A child achieves good grades in an exam and excitedly shares it with their parents. Instead of praise, the parents admonish, saying good grades are expected, warning against pride and insisting on striving for better results next time. Repeated such phrases become the child's guiding principle. Whenever they achieve anything, a voice echoes, deeming the accomplishment unworthy, pushing for greater effort. The author categorizes the inner critic into two types, the harsh inner critic and the punitive inner critic. The harsh inner critic predominantly operates in two dimensions, achievement and emotions. In terms of achievement, it demands placing performance and results above everything else. It generates feelings of inadequacy or failure if one doesn't constantly strive for goals or achieve top results. For instance, Magnus, a talented swimmer, faced immense pressure from coaches to excel further after earning numerous medals. Disappointing his coach in a regional championship haunted Magnus for years, making him feel like a failure in any endeavor. Apart from achievement, the harsh inner critic is active in the emotional realm. It demands prioritizing others' needs over one's own, leading to guilt when not adhering to this demand. For instance, Wheat, always available to help others despite personal inconvenience, finds it difficult to assert her own needs, feeling ashamed even at the thought of interrupting a friend's talk. Moving on to the punitive inner critic, it thrives on conveying derogatory messages, fostering feelings of worthlessness and unlovability. This critic might say, "You're worthless. You don't deserve a good life. If people truly knew you, they wouldn't come near you." It not only undermines self-esteem but also obstructs enjoyment in life's pleasures. For instance, Andrea, raised strictly by nuns, faced punishment for disobedience, endured rigid rules and criticism. As an adult, Andrea couldn't value herself, couldn't accept compliments, constantly doubting others' judgment of her goodness. She found it impossible to relish simple pleasures, associating them with punishable mistakes. According to the author, the punitive inner critic is the most overwhelming and destructive as it disregards one's self-worth entirely. Whether it's the wounded or spoiled inner child or the inner critic, their influence brings about various negative emotions like shame, guilt, and a sense of worthlessness. In response, individuals may adopt coping strategies to alleviate these emotions. The third section explores these ineffective coping mechanisms. The first, compliance, refers to aligning oneself with others' needs to avoid feelings of guilt. Compliant individuals act in ways they think others will like, experiencing emotional stability when others are calm. For instance, Susanna, to appease her volatile boyfriend, often engages in activities he likes, disregarding her own preferences. A trick to identify compliance is to imagine rejecting someone. If refusing makes you feel guilty or ashamed, you might be leaning towards compliance. This coping style disregards personal needs in favor of fulfilling others, leading to self-neglect in a constant attempt to please. Next is the second ineffective coping method, avoidance. It involves evading harmful inner critic voices. For example, Fredo, previously a top student, struggled when he couldn't maintain his previous academic success in university. Encountering multiple disappointing results, he avoided studies altogether, resorting to gaming to evade the terror of not achieving top grades. Avoidance methods vary, from dodging topics to diverting attention, complaining, cursing, or even using substances to numb pain. While avoidance is normal in certain situations, if it obstructs personal growth, as in Fredo's case, it becomes harmful. The final ineffective coping method is overcompensation. It involves displaying behavior contrary to one's true feelings, masking the genuine self. For instance, Sven, feeling vulnerable inside, compensates with aggressive behavior to counter feelings of threat and helplessness. Overcompensation also manifests as narcissism, exaggerated displays for attention, and other attention-seeking behaviors. Unlike compliance or avoidance, overcompensation is harder for the user to recognize. Many feel in control and superior while overcompensating, but some dislike themselves in this state, feeling alienated. Overcompensation is essentially a facade, causing tension and anxiety rather than relaxation, consuming a lot of mental energy. This completes our understanding of 3 out of the 4 components of psychological patterns: the inner child, inner critic, coping mechanisms, and the adult self. Finally, we come to a core question: how can we develop a stable adult self? As mentioned earlier, the adult self represents the mature and stable part of us. When the adult self is in charge, we remain rational, able to objectively perceive ourselves and the environment. We can significantly coordinate our interests with others, not swayed by negative comments. Instead, we might even defend ourselves against unfriendly remarks, stating how they've hurt us and presenting our perspective. The adult self exists within everyone, and our task is to strengthen and amplify it. According to the author's suggestions, there are 2 approaches. Firstly, learning to control harmful behaviors stemming from childhood. Here are 3 recommendations I've gathered. 1. Comfort the wounded inner child by establishing a connection. Giving a name to this inner child facilitates communication. Imagining ourselves facing our inner child helps us understand their pain and identify their needs. Finally, comforting the hurt inner child using adult wisdom, like embracing them, offering advice, or defending against hurtful words, can be helpful. 2. Establish boundaries with the spoiled inner child. Anger often accompanies the spoiled inner child, leading to impulsive actions. To address this, identify genuine needs and employ the adult self to control impulses. Chair dialogues, where one chair represents the spoiled inner child and the other the adult self, aid in clarifying one's true desires. For instance, Charlotte dislikes overtime work. The spoiled inner child would push her to quit, while the adult self suggests reducing overtime. Through chair dialogues, she realized convincing her boss to reduce overtime was the actual need. 3. Negotiate with the inner critic. Instead of instantly accepting the critic's judgment, verify its accuracy. For example, when the inner critic says not caring about others makes us bad, recall past experiences or friends' opinions to counter the critic. If rebutting the inner critic feels challenging, gather positive information daily, like compliments received or personal achievements, to build a positive self-perception. In summary, comforting the wounded inner child, setting boundaries with the spoiled inner child, and negotiating with the inner critic are essential in restraining harmful behaviors from childhood, a crucial step toward strengthening the adult self. Moving on to the second aspect of enhancing the adult self, strengthening elements conducive to its development. Here are 2 suggestions. 1. Establish a connection with your inner happy child. Engaging in activities that activate this happy child varies for each person, like singing loudly with music, sunbathing, or strolling in a park. For those unsure how to reconnect with this happy inner self, the author suggests an emotional bridge technique. By recalling past feelings and sensory experiences, identifying similar situations to reignite these emotions becomes easier. 2. Activate your adult self. Similar to the inner happy child, understanding what triggers the adult self and incorporating it more into our lives is crucial. Engaging in activities like learning, reading, exercising, socializing, or helping others can activate the adult self to some extent. Creating an activity list helps record behaviors that engage the adult self. Placing this list prominently as a reminder aids in practicing these activities regularly. It's essential not to demand too much from yourself and be realistic in planning. Any change takes time, and setbacks are normal. Growth requires patience and persistence. Congratulations on completing Raus aus Schema F. Thank you for listening to the Tim Booker channel. Subscribe, like, and share this valuable knowledge with friends. Let's combine wisdom with practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you, and goodbye.